Ugh, this is going to be a rough one. Big changes came about in 2022. As mentioned before, my IT career had become little more than a means to fund the record label. But as the label grew and I got some decent catalogs, I was literally working two full-time jobs. The main thing that allowed me to keep at it was being able to work from home most afternoons, and I would use the downtime to work on record label responsibilities. Around 2019, the hospital I worked at had been bought out by a bigger hospital system, and I had a new manager and additional coworkers. My original IT manager was a useless piece of shit who lied during my interview and didn't make good on a single thing he had promised. The new IT manager wasn't making any promises and said the structure of the department was more segregated and that if I wanted elevated tasks, I would be required to work at one of the downtown Cleveland facilities. By this point, my passion for IT was dead, so I chose to remain in my current position to avoid downtown driving, keeping my passion on the record label. Being 10 minutes from home is a luxury I had learned to appreciate in my old age. I put no stock in the new IT manager, and he was someone who popped in maybe once or twice a month and was little more than the name of the person on paper that I reported to. Early in 2022, the IT team leader had notified us that he accepted a position in another department. He shared that he chose to leave because he was essentially the manager, but not being paid for or recognized for it. And it was true. He was the main face of IT and always running around putting out fires while the official manager spent most days working from home. Let's just get this out there about management and upper levels. I'm old enough to know that most managers don't deserve their positions. They either got there by being an ass kisser, being ruthless, or knowing someone either as a friend or as a relative. The current IT manager was close friends with his boss and was brought in by that boss into this hospital system. It's about who you know, not how you work. Many years ago, I had aspirations of being an IT manager. I had semi-leadership positions at some of the places I worked, being assigned as the new hire trainer, doing presentations during new hire onboarding classes, being the point of contact for the team, sometimes being mistaken for the manager. Oftentimes, this was because the official managers were dopey introverts with zero people skills. I'm also an introvert and not much of a people person, but I can step out of the box on occasion, especially as the new hire trainer. Who hadn't started a new job where there's little guidance and you're left to flounder, feeling like an idiot? Some call it trial by fire. I call it shitty. I made sure my trainees never felt on their own or without someone to ask questions. Over time, I realized that I cannot play the corporate games required of management, so I dropped that goal. I also used to be vocal and not afraid to speak up during meetings, something that was always encouraged, but rarely wanted. In all of my job hopping years in IT, I only ever had one manager worthy of the title. The others were extremely screwed up or completely useless, and that could be a miniseries in itself. Sharing some of the stories about the management I encountered with some of these record labels only confirms it. I'm sure there are other worthy managers out there in whatever industry, but I haven't worked with them. When the team leader announced that he was leaving the department, I made zero effort to show interest to take his place. No, thank you. The person who was eventually promoted was this high-energy, completely self-absorbed guy. He talked a mile a minute, and his idea of conversation was that he would talk at you, and you would nod and smile. If you tried to speak, he would steamroll over you and had no interest in anything you might say. The departed team leader used to ask me to lunch all the time, and I declined every time because he would always include the spinning top narcissist, and I wanted nothing to do with it unless absolutely necessary. I wasn't overly concerned about him becoming the new team leader, but more concerned with who was going to be assigned his responsibilities. He oversaw several territories outside of the main hospital, which is where I was stationed. This included various smaller medical facilities and clinics in surrounding areas. I was originally told I would not need to take these responsibilities, that they were going to keep him in that position until a new team member could be brought on and trained to do it. I wasn't surprised when the plan changed because Mr. High Energy whined about it. They told me that I would have to take over until the new hire is brought in and trained. Knowing how long it takes to find a new hire, and with the expected light effort my stay-at-home manager would likely make, I had a fairly easy decision to make. I knew without my afternoons home, since I would now be required to drive all over to deal with some of the well-known high-maintenance facilities, I wouldn't be able to keep up with my increased label responsibilities. I gave my 2 weeks notice at the end of March 2022. This coming only 3 weeks after I got the biggest raise I ever got there, a whopping 3% from the usual 2%. Woohoo. I did the math and decided it would be worth a shot. Since the label always seemed in question, I accepted that it could fall apart any time, but the longer I could stick it out, the more likely I would be able to figure out a way to avoid ever going back into IT. Early retirement was likely on the horizon. It was just a matter of when. As of April 2022, I retired from IT and the label was my official full-time job. About a month after leaving IT behind, on May 10th, 2022, I received final clearances for 2 CD reissues by the band Petrol Emotion, each filled with bonus tracks. Their 1988 album, End of the Millennium Psychosis Blues, and their 1990 album, Chemicrazy. This was a band I had discovered on MTV's 120 Minutes in 1988 when they were playing the video for the song Cellophane. Where cellophane and thunder always come. I bought the LP and loved it. So much so that I even bought the CD before I even had a CD player. This was officially the first CD I ever purchased. This was to help motivate me to save my earnings from a factory job I was working, making a whole $3.60 an hour to get my first ever CD player. When I got the list of masters, I sent in my transfer request to the UK side. I was told they had recently done transfers for another label who had licensed the band's material. What? I asked for details and was told it was a multi-disc set on the Demon label. He sent me a link of what was transferred, and it covered all of the bonus material I planned to use. They didn't have any transfers done for the album masters, meaning they were just going to use pre-existing CDs. Since I work fast and can get my CD releases out in around 2 months, I signed the contracts and decided to move forward, getting everything moving as fast as possible. I found the original analog master for the 1988 album in the UK and had it transferred. I found the original analog tape for the 1990 album in the USA and had that transferred. These were fairly rare cases, in my experience, where albums from the late 80s to early 90s had full analog masters available rather than U-matic production masters only. I sent my artwork to final clearance for review and got approval the same day. How the hell did that happen? I paid my advances on both projects, finished up the remastering for Chemicrazy, and got it to the manufacturer. I then announced the upcoming releases on May 25th, 2022. On May 28th, I was contacted by the band's management stating they had not approved of these reissues. He states that the band have explicit approval rights in their contract that no reissues happen without their consent. He told me about the box set that was in progress is planned for a November release. I reached out to my 2 UMG licensing contacts and told them what was happening. They said the oversight was from the side of the UK, but stated if I wanted to do straight reissues without bonus tracks, I would not need band approval. That's not what the band's manager was telling me, but the albums were not hard to find on CD, so straight reissues would be burning money. Plus, Chemicrazy had already been manufactured. I was trying out some sort of 6-panel design. I sent out an announcement that the reissues were on hold and had no problem stating the reason why. I went back and forth with the band's manager, who was obviously offended by the situation. After some lengthy dialogue, he soon realized that I was also blindsided by this mistake made by UMG Licensing, and we started sharing record industry horror stories. He gave me insight on how licenses are paid in the UK, and it's much different than the upfront advances that are required by us in the USA, and also much less of a financial risk. If accurate, it's more about units sold as they sell, rather than a large upfront cost for a unit amount that may never be reached. Eventually, the plan was my releases would be allowed, but this all had to be approved through Universal. My hope was to have a July release to give me enough advance time on the market to move a chunk of stock before the UK box set came out. I already had the Chemicrazy CD in hand, but the Psychosis Blues album was all ready for the manufacturer, but I was holding it back until we see what happens. In typical Glacial fashion, UMG was taking too long for my comfort. By the end of June, without any progress, I ended up canceling the releases for fear it was going to get too close to the box set release date, but only after confirming with UMG that my advances will be refunded. The argument that each of these releases will be for different territories is baseless, because this is no longer the 90s where imports were often a challenge to get, either through mail order catalogs or special orders. It's as simple as visiting a website, and if buyers see a box set for not much more than my 2 CD reissues, they're obviously going to choose the larger package. UMG ruined this for everyone. So now, let's talk about the fun of getting refunded. It took 2 months and a number of follow-ups to even get the process started. I had people telling me I will never get a refund from a major label. This was around $5,500 just for the advances, so I wasn't having that. Originally, I had sent a list of expenses associated with the whole debacle, including such things as manufacturing that had already been done, the time I had spent creating the artwork and remastering, items purchased to include in the artwork, publishing, that sort of thing. My primary contact wouldn't even reply to that. Once I dropped everything off the list other than the advances, stating that I guess I'll need to eat the losses on everything else, that's when he finally responded. Even though it was entirely 100% their fault, they weren't even going to consider reimbursing me for the expenses paid outside of the advances. I was asked to sign up in a system they had, providing all sorts of personal information. A couple of days after that, I got a message telling me the account had been audited and they needed additional documentation to prove I was who I was stating. It was ridiculous. After more back and forth, I was pretty damn shocked when this billion-dollar company's finance department asked me to send them my full bank routing and account numbers through standard email. Are you kidding me? Absolutely not. Since I had worked in IT, I knew that you never send sensitive information like that through insecure methods like basic email. You need to protect yourself by only sending through a secure medium. I went to my primary contact and told him all of this. He also expressed surprise and had a similarly negative opinion of the whole cumbersome process of getting refunded. A momentary glimpse of humanity. After everything was said and done, which included further delays and feet dragging, I finally received the refund in November 2022. It took 5 months and countless follow-ups to make this happen. Like with everything regarding my dealings with this major label monster, had I not been persistent, I wouldn't have gotten anything at all. Taking into account all other related expenses they refused to reimburse me for, I was out several $1,000s, and all down to a mistake the UK licensing department made reading a contract, if they even read it. When all of this started, I couldn't help wonder if this was going to destroy the label, and right after I left IT behind. I'm one of those people who has always had to fight and struggle for everything in life, so none of this surprised me, but it certainly was a disappointment. When all of this began, the 2 clearances a month I had started receiving towards the beginning of the year stopped, and I was back to having to send inquiries if any additional titles were coming. I was being further punished for their mistakes. I think most people would have long since walked away by this mess, but I was determined to continue. I had hair when I started this label. The cases of inventory have been stuffed in a corner since 2022. Many copies have ended up in the trash since I've used them for replacement jewel cases when I would find damages in new stock or with distribution returns. Back when I used to get distribution returns. What a waste. In March 2022, I received final clearance for a CD reissue of the Peter Baumann album Repeat, Repeat from 1981. Baumann was best known for being in the band Tangerine Dream during the 1970s and had released 2 solo albums during the late 70s of instrumental electronics, both of which are great for fans of 70s electronics. For his 1981 album, Baumann chose to make a synth pop record and provided vocals on all of the songs. I discovered him through my video collecting days in the late 90s when I got the video of the single Repeat, Repeat on a Rock America compilation.
There is nothing new at all, isn't there? Repeat, repeat.
I liked the song right away and felt his voice was similar to the android sound of Gary Newman, but to me it was less nasal and more interesting. The original CD at the time was rare, so I went for a used LP to see what I thought. I loved it. It was a very strong album with great melodies and hooks, surprisingly produced by Robert Palmer. I'm sure you know who he is. I would eventually get the CD. When I requested the reissue, there was little in the way of bonus tracks to include. The USA edition of the LP included 3 different mixes of songs, including an extended mix of one called Daytime Logic, which was also released here as a 12-inch single. I asked to include this, but it didn't happen because it came out in the USA through Sony and not UMG. When I got the master list, I saw an unreleased single mix of the song Home Sweet Home that I wish I knew about in advance so I could have at least had one bonus track. I selected the absolute original album master from the UK. When I got the transfer, I was amazed at how much better it sounded than any other version I had heard before. There was so much detail that had been pushed back on the production masters obviously used for the original LP and CD mastering. This would be the best the album would sound in 40 years. I released the album on May 20th, 2022, along with 2 other titles, and it sold okay. A lot of buyers were taking a chance with it, having never heard it before, and some really liked it. Some not so much. When it went into distribution, it initially moved pretty well. After a while, it slowed considerably. It soon became clear this would not move into a second pressing, but I'm happy to have given it new exposure and have introduced it to a new batch of fans. For any fans of early Gary Newman, I would highly recommend Repeat, Repeat. To me, it's brilliant from first note to last.
There is nothing new at all, isn't there? Repeat, repeat. Right, daytime logic. It's my alphabet. What does it name and what does it use? What do you do and when do you die?
I don't know if Baumann was criticized for his singing on this album, but when he reappeared in 1983 with an electro cover of Strangers in the Night, he enlisted a vocalist for the album. For me, the singer was very standard sounding, and I didn't care for the album. I probably would have loved it had Baumann handled the vocal responsibilities. In early 2022, I began working with the members of the band Slow Children on reissues of their 2 early 80s albums. The self-titled debut from 1981. This is the USA edition of that album. And their 1982 album, Mad About Town. They opened their archive of unreleased material to help fill out the CDs with bonus tracks. Those songs came from master tapes, lacquer test pressings, or cassette transfers. There were more, but these were the ones they felt I had been able to improve enough in sound quality to be released. I discovered Slow Children in the 90s when Rhino were releasing a 15-volume series called New Wave Hits of the 80s. This series was the most impressive of the endless 80s compilations that began saturating the market because it went very deep into the genre. There had been a very good compilation from a year or so earlier called Living in Oblivion Volume 1 that had so many great songs, some very obscure. When Volume 2 of that series came out, I nearly cried at how homogenized it was in comparison to Volume 1. The New Wave Hits series was released in batches of 5 at a time, and they didn't disappoint. There were some questionable inclusions, but with obscure treasures like the slow children's song President Am I, it balanced out.
Driving me to politic. I'm not running for president, am I? I'm not running for president, but it could be innocent restraint.
The band were great to work with and very enthusiastic for the reissues. The plan for the first album was to present it as the original UK edition with original artwork and running order. The USA edition had a different album cover and dropped 2 of my favorite songs to include an excellent non-album single, Spring in Fialta. I added the alternate album cover on the reverse of the booklet and included all of the lyrics in the booklets. The band were kind enough to send over the lyrics for the song Suspense from the second album, which for some reason didn't appear on the original LP inner sleeve. The CDs were released, along with the Peter Baumann CD, on May 20th, 2022, and had a really good initial sales burst.
I don't know why you pressure me, you give me such a hard time. The broken shutters off the shores of Portugal, spring in Fialta staircase in swollen misty. Crimea is breaking in my crowded mind. I was so thoughtful and I regret it. I was so careful and you upset it. Staring at the ceiling is just my way. I stare and I see, just staring at the ceiling. Vanessa, vacillating decisions, evacuating. Mental strain for a savior. They're talking, you're drinking, you're not washed up, but you're sinking. You're suspect to rumor, lashing out defensive humor.
When they went into distribution, the first album faced some of what happened with the Divinal's Temperamental CD, in that a lot of resellers bought a bunch of stock and eventually a bunch came back as unsold, but only about half the amount of that Divinal's album. Some fans were ecstatic to finally have these cult classics on CD, and a lot of newcomers who took the chance really liked the albums. That was the great thing about being a genre-focused label, is that fans of the same music who didn't know some of the titles I put out would take the chance and oftentimes be treated to a new favorite. They seemed to feel the same way I did when I discovered something old that was new to me through my Trouser Press record guide. For such a niche genre as New Wave, it's almost bottomless as to how many bands came and went through that brief magical period. It's time for a very basic rundown of my remastering process. I had done a full video on the subject a few years back, which is now dead and gone, so this will be a general overview. When I receive a tape transfer, it's a large file containing the full reel of tape, including any test tones and even lots of blank space at the end of the tape. The transfers are done flat without any compression or tweaking of any kind, other than alignment to the test tones. A typical album master will contain around 4 to 6 songs per reel, captured to high-resolution digital. I would often receive a link with sign-in info to retrieve the files. Sometimes the downloads would include scans of the tape boxes and any inserts in the boxes. Some also included notes from the engineers that did the transfer stating how the transfer went, if there were any problems encountered, or if it was an easy transfer after the tape had been baked to make it usable. After downloading, I'll separate the tracks into individual files. My first step is often to listen to all tracks with headphones and repair any dips or drops in sound, which are usually caused by little crimps or creases in the tapes. They can be very light fluctuations that can be easily repaired with something called an envelope. This is a type of amplification that can be adjusted to a highlighted area. Since most light dips appear to be gaps where the lowest point is in the center, the envelope can make the loudest volume increase in the center, leveling out on both ends. Larger dropouts, like the two shown here at the bottom, require more refined repairs. I also listen for any sort of static pops released during the transfer or anomalies in the tape and repair those as I come across them. The next step is EQing. My EQ of choice is a parametric EQ since it allows me to slide across frequencies while previewing so I can better pinpoint the areas that need adjustment. As mentioned in an earlier video, most transfers from the 80s tend to sound mid-range heavy, and these old tapes are also lacking in high end and a lot of time low end as well. I'll use the parametric EQ to bring each song to life. Every song usually requires different settings. Setting the volume is based on sound samples I've used for about 10 years. I will adjust a song to match the volume of a sample. The final volume boost is done by hard limiting. This prevents any stray note that surpasses my chosen volume from going over into clipping. I set volume entirely by ear rather than level meters because each song can have different dynamics, and even if the level meters are similar, the audio could sound considerably louder or softer. I do all of my volume adjusting by going back and forth during sections of a song and adjusting until the perceived volume is the same. Since my reputation was to offer highly dynamic remasters that still have decent volume, this brought me a lot of fans. I had people send messages telling me they've bought titles from me because they were assured to receive a dynamic remaster, which has been nearly non-existent for the better part of 25 to 30 years. Once I have everything set to what sounds good through headphones, I will burn a test CD, even if mastering for LP. I'll play this back through the home system and the car CD player over a couple of days and tweak anything that jumps out at me. Most remastering facilities knock out a remaster in a couple of hours. For me, it's often a couple of days. For every CD I ever released on my label, the volume should be consistent from my first release to last, and if you put them in a CD changer, the volume would likely be the same across albums. If having to remaster from a previous CD, the process is pretty much the same. If having to remaster from vinyl, that includes several additional steps to clean up the audio. I never use automatic click and pop removers because in some instances, they cannot determine the difference between certain sounds, such as certain analog synths, various types of horns, or even certain drum sounds, and will damage or destroy those. I do it all manually. There are some additional steps depending on the source material, but that's the standard process. In February 2022, I received final clearance to do a vinyl reissue of the Missing Persons album Spring Session M. I figured with the CD having moved as many copies as it did, the vinyl could possibly do really well. I compiled the LP sides and prepared my artwork and sent it off to the manufacturer. When I got the test pressings, I thought they sounded pretty good, but not great. It seemed they pulled the high end down even more than usual, and it gave it a sort of muddy sound compared to the original files. I went back and forth with this and decided to move forward. A lot of modern reissues drop the high end compared to the original, so I thought maybe some people would find this a benefit. All other aspects of the sound were good. The plan was to release this in July 2022. When I got the inventory, I was overzealous in opening pre-orders and they started rolling in by the time I was concerned with this pressing. It seemed to have been pressed grossly off-center. I mean really bad. You could see the tone arm swaying back and forth from across the room, and the music sounded drunk. I'm willing to accept a little sway, but this was excessive. So I recorded a video and shared it, asking for feedback. The majority said they would absolutely not be happy with it. I took the feedback, along with my own disapproval of the pressing, and told the manufacturer I will not accept this. They told me it has to go through a multi-step review with different departments before they decide whether or not they will repress. I went back and forth with my project manager and the upper-level sales manager for days and days, being promised dates for an answer and having that date changed multiple times. The fact that I had close to 100 open orders that buyers had already paid for elevated the stress levels. About a week later, they said the different departments have stated the off-centering is within industry tolerance. Are you kidding me? By this point, I had to threaten legal action. I was not being stuck with this multi-thousand-dollar disaster. I told them I was done using them because of the increasing amount of unsatisfactory pressings that seemed to make it through their seemingly non-existent quality control. By this time, I had already canceled another project with them and signed on with a new manufacturer. They replied and said they will repress the LP and it would take about 4 weeks. They also said they would like to finish off the last pressing in progress and then we go our separate ways. Wait a minute. Didn't I just say that I was done? Are they really giving me the, "You can't fire us, we quit"? Pathetic. Oh, this is the gift that just keeps on giving. A month later, in early August, the stock was still sitting in my garage waiting for them to send a truck for the recall. This sales manager was a real piece of work. Once again, he promised 100% for certain dates that the pallet will be picked up, and those dates would come and go. Add to that, the completed parts for the title I canceled were to have been sent to my new manufacturer, but a month later, they still hadn't shipped the parts. As if this wasn't enough of a cluster, in late August, they tell me they have to further delay the pressing of the LP because a solid purple shade that was required is now out of stock and likely won't be on hand again for weeks. They didn't even prepare for this? I wanted to scream. After uncertainty of the actual arrival date of the missing vinyl color, I looked at replacing it with a similar color. I landed on neon purple. They expressed concern because this one will likely be overtaken by the red that was being used and suggested that I change it to a half and half split. I couldn't do that without having new stickers printed, so out of desperation and exhaustion, I said just do the neon purple and red mix and I'll deal with however it comes out. Long before this, I had gone through all pre-orders made and mailed out any additional items that had been ordered along with their missing persons LP that was being waited on. I just didn't want my patient buyers, who I was updating regularly on the endless delays, to have to go without the items I had on hand while waiting for the day that felt like it may never come. It's not their fault, so I was willing to eat any additional shipping costs. I have earned my cynicism. I finally got the finished Missing Persons LP at the end of September 2022, but not without issues. There was a box that had no inserts written on the side. What happened to the damn inserts? And like the reworked Oingo Boingo LP I had rejected previously, there were quite a few copies with bent corners. Once I started opening copies to see how the red with the alternate purple choice came out, I found out why there was a box without inserts. Because some of the copies I opened had 2 inserts. I wasn't going to be that upset and decided I would just send the box with no inserts into distribution. The color mix was different, but not bad. It made the purple more blurred into red rather than being finely separated like the rejected pressing. You probably can't see it too well in the video. Here's the splatter edition. There's only one copy left in existence of that first pressing, and it's on my wall. I played the LP through to ensure it was fine, and immediately started sending out pre-orders.
All I need is a window to roll through. It's the only thing that don't tell me what to do. And don't you ask me where I'm going to.
But get this. When stock arrived, there was a second pallet of mystery boxes. What is this? A gift for my endless patience? I opened it and found they had sent me another customer's stock along with my own. Unbelievable. Wait. No, it's not. This began another drawn-out process of them having to arrange a pickup while this pallet took up space in my garage. I was far more kind and accommodating to them on this latest screw-up than I should have been, but I was thinking more about the customer who was waiting on this misdirected delivery. I reopened pre-orders and continued sending out the long-delayed stock. For those of you who got one. I was kind of disappointed that it didn't fly out the door like the Boingo LPs. The interest in a vinyl reissue of this album was not near the level of my CD reissue. Aside from the Boingo LPs, I was finding the vinyl revival grossly exaggerated. It took a while to move the full pressing, and there were some reviews pointing out the lower high end, which I guess wasn't appreciated by everyone. When I play the LP, I boost the treble on the stereo a notch and it sounds fine, but I don't understand why GZ Cutting takes it upon themselves to lower the high end, especially this much. When the LP sold out, I decided to do a smaller repress with a local manufacturer, Gotta Groove Records in Cleveland. I figured this initial experience to support a local business would determine if I would use them going forward. I took the opportunity to pay for a brand new cut of the LP to bring the high end back up. Not long after I signed on, I regretted it. The face of the company can only be described as a smartass. He had such an attitude. There was an arrogant, condescending tone that I did not like at all. He seemed like he hated his job, and interacting with customers was a painful process. Soon after I submitted this second pressing, someone from Universal Production contacted me asking if I could send them my Missing Persons LP artwork. I thought they just wanted a high-resolution image for a streaming service or something similar, and happily sent them along my press-quality LP jacket. They followed up asking if I could send over the insert and LP labels. At this point, I got suspicious and asked if they were planning to do their own pressing. The response I got was, "It's possible." I did not send them the additional art. Some months later, someone notified me of pre-orders opening for another edition of this LP through Universal. This was pretty nasty. I was barely a year into my license, and not only do they decide to do their own pressing, but they dupe me into providing them at least part of the artwork that I spent hours putting together, so they could use it on a competing product?
What the hell is going on here?
Underhanded and dirty. Use your own damn art department, or send me a paycheck. When my small repress was completed, I headed out to the factory to pick it up. I opened a copy in the car and really liked the look of the purple mix. When I got home to play it, I had mixed feelings. Some copies were really clean, but I would say about 50% of the copies I opened had a sort of light scraping sound between songs. When I looked at those copies in the light, I could see a sort of dull smudge look across the LP that the clean copies didn't show. It wasn't a showstopper, but it wasn't ideal. I contacted the manufacturer to give my feedback on the pressing, good and bad, including sound samples of what I was hearing. I got more smart-ass tone and the excuse that the issue I pointed out was normal for this sort of color mix. No, it's not normal, and the fact that it wasn't on every copy confirms it was a buildup that happened on the stampers during the pressing. This manufacturer was alleged to be one of the best, but I found the final product very mediocre. Tie that in with this guy's shit attitude, and there was no way I was ever going to work with them again. I could have saved hundreds and hundreds of dollars by being able to drive out and pick up the stock when it was ready. But this guy's I hate life attitude was not worth it. By the end, this LP sold about a quarter the amount the CD had. So much for the vinyl renaissance. From my experience, people were still buying CDs more than LPs. In mid-March 2022, I received final clearance to do a vinyl reissue of the Split Ends compilation titled History Never Repeats. I looked over the master list and found all of the albums had already been archived to high-resolution digital in the UK. I decided I would rebuild the compilation from the album masters and got downloads for everything I needed. Split Ends were a band I knew from early MTV because they seemed to play them on constant rotation as if they were massive hit makers. I didn't click with them at the time, and it was only around 2015 that I began investigating the catalog. All that was barely available at the time were import CDs that were falling out of print, and all of them were some of the worst sounding I had ever heard. They had been overseen by Eddie Rayner from the band, and I could not condone the excessive compression that made the albums so squashed that the drums sounded like they were being played through a wall. I found them literally unlistenable. A couple of the albums had also been remixed, so not the original known versions. Everything about this one went easily when it came to remastering, preparing the artwork, and the test pressings. As we know from experience, that couldn't last. When I received the finished stock in mid-September 2022, I was breathless and numb. When I was battling with Precision on the Missing Persons LP repress, I was assured by the all-talk sales manager that he will make sure everything comes out top-notch with this Split Ends pressing, which was to be my last, aside from the Missing Persons repress, to be done with Precision. As with all of his other hollow promises and assurances, this too proved to be false. The two variants I chose were a violet base with blue splatter and a red haze that was sort of a red mixed with clear. Both variants had issues. The red haze had this loud crunching sound that opened each side of the LP. It would pass in about a minute, but I found it horrifying. I've heard this on a lot of LPs over the years to some degree, and I'm not sure what causes it. I'm guessing maybe too low of a temperature during the pressing and not filling out the final grooves? This was not on the test pressings. The other variant had two issues, depending on which copy you opened. The first issue was a light scraping noise between tracks on side one. It wasn't a showstopper, but not ideal. I've said that before. The other issue appeared on the copies without that light scraping. On side 2 of that pressing, obviously done with a different stamper set, the song Dirty Creature had a loud rotational pop that started right at the beginning of the song and continued for the first full minute. Might as well show you what they look like. This is all topped off by Precision placing a sticker in the incorrect spot again, this time right over a band member's face. But considering the role that band member will play on my label closing down, I'm fine with it. I sent a red-faced email that I was sickened that this is what I had received. Even though the red variant sounded great once the opening crunchy sound faded after the first minute, I found that one the most unforgivable. I was not going to argue to have this repressed. I just didn't have that much fight left in me. I wanted so bad to cut ties with Precision and their fast food approach to vinyl manufacturing and be done with them once and for all. The GZ media reputation has been very well earned. The LP's release date was September 16th, 2022.
I got you. That's all I want. Spirit of a sailor, sucker navigates the dark.
There were some minor reports about these issues, but nothing overwhelming. Maybe the vinyl policy I had in place stopped me from hearing more about dissatisfaction on the pressing, or maybe most people were not as bothered as I was. When I receive test pressings that are well centered and sound clean, I would expect the final pressings to be the same. But the test pressings come from overseas where the stampers are created, and it seems when the stampers are shipped to Canada for manufacturing, that's where the problems happen. My guess is they play frisbee with the stampers when they're bored, judging by the final results on several of my pressings. The LP had a decent pre-order and then gradually sold everything else in distribution. It wasn't immediate, and I expected it would be another one-and-done pressing. I also had requests in to do several of the albums on CD, and after hearing how punchy and dynamic the original master transfers were compared to the overcompressed disasters that were the 2006 remasters, I began inquiring about the CDs. I thought if those approvals came through, I'd likely do a small repress of the LP through my then new manufacturer. By the end of my label, I will have gone through 5 vinyl manufacturers, the last one being the best and the one I anticipated staying with had the label not shut down. I'm going to end this episode here. I need a nap.